Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's nice to be together. This week, I've been thinking about a question, and the question is, what do we do when our world seems to be upended? And in this week's Parsha, we have two female characters, Sarah and Lot's wife, who are faced with life-changing surprises that seem to upend their worlds. But they have vastly different responses, and those responses can teach us how we might respond to our own upending moments in our life, when we might experience moments of disillusionment, feelings of the unknown or the unexpected, or even disorientation. Parshat Vayera begins with three angels visiting Abraham and Sarah disguised as travelers. We probably all know the story pretty well. The angels came with the answer to Sarah's lifelong prayers. She had spent her life wishing to give birth to a child. She even had her maidservant give birth on her behalf. But all of a sudden, at almost 90 years old, the angels told Sarah, "Soon you'll give birth." And her answer, we all know it. She laughed. She immediately laughed, which is an ambiguous response, and I think we've probably all heard Drashot wondering about what that laugh was. Did Sarah laugh because she felt a moment of joy at the possibility of a new child? Did she possibly laugh because she's denying the possibility of something so normal actually happening to her in her abnormal life? The commentators run the gamut on what this laughter is. Rashi says it might be shock. Sforno and Chizkuni say it's a laugh of disbelief. Whatever this laughter is, it's surely a moment of disillusionment for Sarah. She faces a reality that she never expected, a long-time prayer answered, even when she probably gave up hope. A midrash teaches that Sarah's laughter came from imagining the transformation ahead. She saw herself as old and withered, but imagined that as a pregnant woman, she would be young and beautiful, even adorned with new jewelry. Pregnancy, in the rabbis' minds, symbolized rejuvenation and beauty. Soon she may not even recognize her own body. In this light, perhaps Sarah was experiencing a moment of disorientation, a moment of confusion about what time or place one is in. We often think that disorientation is a feeling of fear or resistance. But this instance teaches us that disorientation, it sometimes emerges as a complex emotional response that contains multitudes. It can contain both joy and doubt, hope and skepticism, anticipation and anxiety, all wrapped up into one unexpected moment. This moment for Sarah forced her to exist in the uncertain reality of having a child at almost 90 years old. Her assumptions about her life were about to unravel in the best possible ways. Sarah's laughter, in all its ambiguity, represents a willingness to stand in an uncertain space, to let herself imagine a new reality even as she questions it. She allows herself to be present in the moment of mystery, even entertaining fantasies of physical transformation and renewal. But not everyone responds to life-altering news with such openness to transformation. We see that later in our Parsha, where we encounter another woman facing her own moment of confusion and disillusionment. Lot's wife, commanded to flee her home and to never look back, provides us with a stark counterpoint to Sarah's response. When the exact same angels that visited Abraham and Sarah visit Lot's household, they tell Lot and his wife to flee their home of Sodom and Gomorrah and to never look back. So they flee to save themselves from the destruction of their hometowns. But on their way out, Lot's wife could not resist. So she looked back. In doing so, she was punished and she was turned into a pillar of salt. Lot's wife looks back, and we can imagine what she was worrying about. The household of her 2 daughters and their husbands and families who did not get a chance to flee. She looks back at her home and her friends and her life. Who could blame her? How could she not look back? How could she not and try to make sense of the sudden and immense loss that she had just experienced? The rabbis teach Lot's wife, who's unnamed in the Torah, but Midrashim call her Edith, was always unwelcoming. It said she wouldn't even give salt to a neighbor who asked for it, which is why, in turn, she became the salt that she was unwilling to give. Lot's wife's refusal to heed the command to flee Sodom and Gomorrah without looking back, it's a response that many of us can empathize with. When faced with suddenly leaving behind the familiar, it's natural to struggle with the how and why of the moment. In contrast, Sarah's response of ambiguous laughter represents another common coping mechanism, minimizing emotional reactions to avoid fully grappling with their implications. Her defense mechanism suggests a struggle to make sense of having a long-held prayer answered so dramatically. Together, Sarah and Lot's wife's divergent reactions demonstrate the spectrum of human responses to life-altering events, from denial to avoidance to stunned inaction. Both reflect the struggle to adapt when the unimaginable becomes reality. There's a story told in the Talmud of the time right after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. The Jews had just lost their home and life as they knew it. Their connection to God, which was via the temple, was severed. But during the war, there was a fringe group of Jews, led by their rabbi, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who snuck out of Jerusalem by carrying their rabbi in a coffin. They set out to create a new Jewish community and life in a town called Yavne. There they created a Judaism unrecognizable to the temple-observing Jews. They developed new spiritual practices, prayer, new ways to gather, and new ways to connect to God by learning, all instead of offering sacrifices in the temple. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's inventions were so great that they still resonate in the way we practice Judaism today. We wouldn't be sitting here praying in our sanctuary without his inventions. But a bit later, when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai sat on his actual deathbed, not the one carried out of Jerusalem, his students saw him weeping. They were shocked. They asked, "Why are you crying?" And he says, "What if I was wrong? What if everything I did to rework the tradition that no longer continued in Jerusalem was for the worst? What if instead of saving my tradition, I actually helped destroy it?" We know, many, many years later, that he indeed did not destroy the tradition of learning in the Beit Midrash and praying. And even though he showed immense bravery in his creative escape plan from Jerusalem and true leadership in building something new, he too may have experienced more disillusionment in the Talmud in his life than the Talmud tells. He too likely had emotional responses to leaving Jerusalem. Maybe we could even imagine that he cried in the coffin that he was carried out of. Like Sarah's ambiguous laughter and Lot's wife's paralysis, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's weeping on his deathbed reflects the human struggle to reconcile the disorientation of the present moment with an uncertain future. He had the foresight to chart a new path forward, but still harbored fears that his efforts might ultimately fail. So, like I asked at the beginning, how do we respond to uncertainty? To the sense of disillusionment we feel when approaching the unknown? We can respond with openness and courage, or with fear and paralysis. We can keep building, even if we do not know if we're building towards the right thing. Or we can turn back. We can become a metaphorical pillar of salt, stuck in the past with no hope for the future. I'm sure we can all think of our own moments of disillusionment in our community. For us as Jewish people, for our country, for our world. Like the characters in our parsha, we can find ourselves in moments of disillusionment, maybe even leading us to disorientation. And some of us might feel like Sarah, caught between hope and skepticism about what's possible. Others of us may feel like Lot's wife, frozen in place, unable to move forward as we witness what feels like the destruction of everything familiar. Still others channel Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's spirit of adaptation, while also perhaps carrying our own private doubts. So how can we live in a world that honors both the disillusionment, gives space for everyone to feel their fears or certainties, and also moves forward together? I'd like to suggest that we can learn from our biblical and rabbinic models. From Sarah, we learned that it's okay to hold multiple truths at once. Just as her laughter contained both joy and doubt, we too can acknowledge both the genuine concerns of our neighbors and the possibility of positive change. When someone different than us expresses fear or hope, we might practice by answering with Sarah's complexity, neither dismissing their perspective nor becoming trapped by it. From Lot's wife, we learn the cost of becoming paralyzed by our fears. It's always tempting to metaphorically look back, to become so fixated on what we're losing or what we fear we're losing that we cannot move forward. But we must ask ourselves, what price do we pay when we let our fear turn into salt? What opportunities for connection and transformation do we miss? And from Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, we learn perhaps the most crucial lesson for our time: the courage to build something new, even when we're uncertain of the outcome. He showed us that preserving community sometimes requires us to let go of our familiar ways of doing things. He teaches us that we must dig deeper to answer questions about moving forward. How can we maintain our convictions while still breaking bread with those that are different than us? How can we hold space for both passionate advocacy and humble listening? How might we, like Sarah, allow ourselves to imagine new possibilities, even as we acknowledge our doubts? The path forward requires us to be a bit like Sarah, a bit like Lot's wife, and a bit like Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai at different moments. To have Sarah's capacity for complex emotional responses, to learn from Lot's wife's warning about the paralysis of fear, and to summon Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's courage to build anew, even amid uncertainty. We may not be able to control the outcome, but we can control how we treat each other along the way. Our future, it depends on our ability to remain in relationship with each other through times of change and uncertainty. Whether we feel triumph or trepidation or hope, we're one community. We're bound together like the ancient Israelites in their own moments of transformation. Our task is always to find ways to move forward, even when, and especially when, the path ahead seems unclear. Shabbat Shalom.